My name is Malcolm Reed, and the night after my wife's funeral, my daughter-in-law raised a glass in my house like she had already won. She thought I was just a grieving old man signing away $60 million, until one video, one trust document, and one terrible mistake turned her victory speech into a public humiliation she will never recover from.
I handed my phone to the AV technician at the Ritz-Carlton, and 200 of Atlanta's elite went silent as my dead wife's face appeared on the ballroom screens. Loretta had been gone 3 weeks. The woman who'd called me an hour after her funeral to discuss restructuring sat frozen on stage, her performance mask finally cracking. Simone looked exactly like what she was, a thief caught mid-theft. Behind her, my son-in-law Garrett gripped a chair for support, his expensive tuxedo suddenly looking like a costume. They'd spent those 3 weeks moving money, forging documents, planning how to steal a $60 million empire from a grieving old man they thought was too broken to fight back. They were wrong. The screens showed Loretta sitting in my attorney's office, recorded 2 weeks before she died. Her voice filled the ballroom with the clarity of a woman who knew exactly what was coming. "If you're watching this," she said calmly, "someone is trying to take what isn't theirs." I watched Simone's face drain of color as my wife spoke from beyond the grave. Beside me stood Sterling Chambers, my lawyer, holding evidence of shell companies in the Cayman Islands. $5 million transferred while Loretta was dying. Insurance beneficiaries changed. An affair documented on video by my 16-year-old granddaughter, who'd learned that courage sometimes means destroying your own father. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to understand how I got here standing on a stage at my wife's memorial gala, watching the people who'd tried to steal her legacy realize they'd underestimated the wrong man. It started 3 hours after we buried her, with a phone call that told me everything I needed to know about timing and respect. This story might hit close to home for some of you. Before I begin, I'd love if you'd drop a comment. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? Your perspective truly matters. Quick note, this story includes some fictionalized details for storytelling, but the message about protecting what matters most is real. At 60 years old, 3 days after burying my wife of 40 years, I sat at the head of the dining room table and recognized my daughter-in-law's smile for exactly what it was. The room still smelled like funeral flowers, lilies and roses rotting in crystal vases, filling the mansion with the sweetness of death. Simone sat across from me in a black designer suit that probably cost $3,000, leaning over the asset documents my lawyer had prepared. She was 39, sharp-featured, and had married my son Darren 7 years ago with all the warmth of a corporate merger. Right now, studying the list of properties and accounts Loretta and I had built over 4 decades, she looked exactly like a predator circling wounded prey. "We need to talk about stabilizing the brand during this transition, Dad," she said, her manicured finger tracing down the column that listed our 7 soul food restaurants across Atlanta. $60 million in real estate, recipes, and reputation. "The empire you and Mom built deserves protection, especially now." She said empire like she was measuring it for her name. My son Darren sat beside her, 42 years old and wearing another expensive suit I'd paid for. He stared at his Italian leather shoes, the way he'd avoided hard truths his entire life. 3 days ago, he'd cried at his mother's graveside. Today, he looked like a man at a business meeting. Loretta had died at 59, after 8 months of ovarian cancer that ate through her like fire through paper. 40 years of marriage. And I was only now realizing how many enemies she'd been holding at bay while she lived. The memorial fund alone, $8 million, set aside for culinary scholarships and community feeding programs, sat there on the page like bait. Simone's smile slipped for just a second when she saw that number. Not grief. Calculation. 40 years of marriage teaches you to read a room. Grief teaches you to read a threat. "The thing is," Simone continued, pulling a leather portfolio from her bag. "You shouldn't have to carry this burden alone. Not while you're mourning." She slid papers across the mahogany table, and I caught the scent of her perfume, something cold and expensive that Loretta had always hated. "I had our family attorney draw these up. Estate care and succession transition documents. They formalize what Mom would have wanted, family, taking care of family." I looked down at the heading. Professional typeset, legal jargon, 20 pages thick. "This just lets us handle operations for the next 90 days, she said, her voice honey-sweet. "Restaurant management, foundation oversight, vendor relationships. You can finally rest. We'll handle everything." Darren still wouldn't meet my eyes. I scanned the first page. Transfer of voting control, board authority, signature authorization on all accounts. 90 days of Simone running everything Loretta and I had built with our hands, starting with nothing but a food truck and a dream back in 1983. Loretta would have thrown her out of this house. "Sign here," Simone said, producing a pen like a knife. "And you can focus on healing." The funeral flowers were dying. The documents were professionally prepared. My son sat silent beside his wife, complicit in his cowardice. And my daughter-in-law couldn't quite hide her smile anymore. The expression of someone who'd been waiting a very long time for my wife to die. How long had she been planning this? The papers sat between us like a declaration of war dressed in sympathy. I looked at the signature line, then at my son, who wouldn't meet my eyes, then back at Simone, who'd stopped pretending to mourn. I didn't reach for the pen. "I'll need to review these with my own attorney," I said. Her smile died. "Dad, we're family. You don't need—" "I'll call you when I'm ready." She stood, gathering the papers with movements sharp enough to cut. Darren followed her like a shadow follows its master. Still silent, still useless. They left the dining room, and I heard her heels clicking toward the hallway. Heard her pull out her phone. 20 minutes later, standing quiet in that same hallway, I would hear exactly how big a mistake my refusal was. 20 minutes of forced small talk, and Simone finally made her excuse about checking on operations. Her phone was already in her hand before she cleared the doorway. I waited 30 seconds. Darren had retreated to the library with his whiskey, avoiding hard truths the way he'd avoided them his entire life. The mansion felt too large, every room heavy with dying funeral lilies and untouched casseroles. 3 days since we'd buried Loretta. Simone's heels clicked on hardwood, moving toward the back hallway. I kept to the carpet runner, quiet as I'd learned to be watching my wife work a room. The service corridor angled past the pantry, and I positioned myself in the shadow where the wall turned. Her voice carried, sharp and clear. "No, I can talk now," she said. "He refused to sign. After everything I said about family and burden." A pause. "I don't care. We're doing this tomorrow night." He's softer than I thought. Still crying like some broken old man. "We lock it all down tomorrow night before he finds his spine." My hands went cold. "The memorial fund, the voting shares, everything." Simone continued. "Garrett has the papers ready. Once we control the foundation accounts, the rest falls like dominoes. The old man won't even know what hit him. Grief is fog. Rage is glass." I could see straight through her now. She laughed. Actually laughed. "Tomorrow night at the restaurant. We'll say it's a memorial planning meeting. Get him to sign while he's emotional. He'll be surrounded by memories of her, probably crying into his bourbon. Perfect timing. Tomorrow night. Hours, not days." My wife had been dead 72 hours, and her daughter-in-law was dividing up the empire like a corporate acquisition. Loretta used to say, a woman who smiles that much is either in love or planning murder. "Stop worrying," Simone said. "Darren will do exactly what I tell him, and Leland is too busy grieving to think straight. By Friday, we'll own everything, and there's nothing he can do about it." A stair creaked. I looked up. At the top of the back staircase stood a teenage girl with her phone clutched like a weapon. Juno Thornton was 16 years old, my granddaughter, caught between childhood and whatever terrible understanding she'd just gained. Her dark eyes were wide, her face pale, and in that moment, I watched something break behind her expression. Some last belief that family meant safety. How many days had I spent crying, while Simone spent them planning? Simone's voice dropped to a whisper. I have to go. Tomorrow night. Don't screw this up. The call ended. Her heels clicked back toward the main hall, and I pressed deeper into shadows, letting her pass. When her footsteps faded, I looked up again. Juno hadn't moved. We stared at each other across the darkness, her at the top of the stairs, me in the shadows below. In her eyes, I saw the same sick recognition. I felt the world reorganizing itself around a truth too ugly to ignore. I made a choice in that moment. I would not cry in front of them again, would not show weakness, would not beg for mercy from people who measured my wife's death in opportunities. Tomorrow night, Simone expected to lock down control of everything Loretta and I had built from nothing, 7 restaurants. A foundation. 40 years of reputation earned, one meal at a time. Tomorrow night, she would learn what those 40 years had taught me about fighting. Juno's hand tightened on her phone. I nodded once, and she disappeared back up the stairs, silent as smoke. By morning, I would be standing in the flagship restaurant kitchen, where Loretta and I had started with borrowed equipment and her grandmother's recipes, and I would start looking for whatever weapons my wife had left me. The flagship kitchen at 5 in the morning smelled exactly the same as 40 years ago. Garlic, thyme, and yesterday's cornbread. But walking into it the day after discovering my family's betrayal made every familiar surface feel like foreign territory. I'd left the mansion before dawn, before Darren could pretend grief over breakfast. This kitchen was our first location, opened in 1983 with borrowed equipment and Loretta's grandmother's recipes. If my wife had left me weapons, they'd be here. I moved past the industrial stove where she'd taught me her biscuits, past the prep counter where we'd counted our first week's profits. The office sat in the back corner, a desk and the computer system managing vendor contracts and purchasing. I entered my password. Access denied. I tried again. Slower. Access denied. Contact system administrator. Inventory management. Denied. Payroll portal. Denied. Bank account interface for all 7 locations. Denied. They didn't wait for tomorrow night. They were already moving. Simone had told her conspirator they'd lock everything down at tomorrow night's memorial meeting, but she'd lied, or accelerated after I refused to sign. While I slept, someone had changed every password on every system I'd built. 40 years, and I needed permission to check my own vendor orders. The takeover wasn't coming. It was here. They'd been inside my systems, changing locks, sealing doors, building walls between me and everything Loretta and I had created. This kitchen had taught me everything about building. Now, it would teach me about fighting. Mr. Thornton. I turned. Gwendolyn Mercer stood by the walk-in cooler, 54 years old and wearing her chef's coat like armor. She'd worked alongside Loretta for 25 years, arriving at 5 every morning to prep for lunch. Right now, she looked at me with the expression my wife used to wear, knowing exactly what was wrong, but waiting for permission to say, "IT." "I was hoping you'd come in early," she said quietly. "The systems are locked. Changed at midnight." She moved closer, voice dropping. "Miss Simone came by yesterday with an IT contractor. Said it was a security update after Ms. Loretta's passing. Changed all the administrative passwords for safety." Safety. The word tasted like poison. "Mr. Thornton, Ms. Loretta made me promise something 6 months ago, right after her diagnosis." My breath stopped. She said, if anything ever happened, if you ever got locked out of your own kitchen, if someone tried to take control, I should tell you about the second drawer. What second drawer? The old spice cabinet in dry storage, the one from the original location that she wouldn't let us throw out. How long had Loretta known this was coming? She made me swear, Gwendolyn continued. Said you'd know what to do with what she left. Said she was making sure you had protection even if she wasn't here to give it. 6 months ago, December, when Loretta was diagnosed. 6 months ago was January, when she was still strong enough to work half days. Still fighting, still planning, still protecting me from threats I hadn't seen. Show me, I said. Gwendolyn led me toward dry storage, past the industrial mixers and prep stations where my wife had perfected her recipes. The old spice cabinet stood against the back wall, scarred wood and brass handles. The first piece of furniture we'd ever bought. Loretta had insisted on keeping it through every renovation, every upgrade. Now I understood why. The second drawer. Whatever my wife had left me was going to change everything. The spice cabinet was older than the restaurant, a salvaged piece from our original food truck, and my hands shook as I reached for the second drawer, because this was going to be the last message my wife would ever leave me. Not like that, Gwendolyn said gently. Ms. Loretta showed me the trick. You have to press the left corner while you pull. I did what she said. The drawer slid out smooth and normal, filled with ancient jars of cardamom and star anise we hadn't used in years. But when Gwendolyn reached past me and pressed something inside the left rear corner, I heard a soft click. The bottom of the drawer lifted. Underneath, in a space barely 4 inches deep, sat a brass key and a folded piece of cream-colored stationery. Loretta's personal paper. The kind she used for handwritten recipe notes because she said a grandmother's biscuit recipe didn't belong on a computer screen. She made me practice opening it 3 times, Gwendolyn whispered. Said you'd need to see it wasn't an accident, that she built this on purpose. Even dying, she was still protecting me. I lifted the key first. Heavy brass. Number 447 stamped into the bow. A safety deposit box somewhere. Then the note. The paper soft with age, folded twice. I'll give you privacy, Mr. Thornton, Gwendolyn said, and left before I could thank her. The dry storage room smelled like flour and old wood. I unfolded the note with fingers that felt numb. The date at the top read February 14th, 2026. Valentine's Day. 6 months ago, when Loretta was still strong enough to write, still fighting the cancer that would kill her 4 months later. Her handwriting. God, I'd forgotten how she looped her capital L's. My love, it began. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and they're moving faster than I hoped. The words blurred. I blinked hard, forced myself to keep reading. Don't sign anything when I'm gone. Don't let grief make you weak. Don't trust Simone with the voting shares she's been positioning herself since Christmas. I've seen the way she looks at the quarterly reports. I've heard her on the phone with someone discussing timeline. Christmas. 6 months before Loretta died. 7 months ago now. Simone had already been planning this. Sterling Chambers has copies of everything. Trust him. The safety deposit box key opens box 447 at First National downtown. I've left you what you need there. Appointment is set for 3 p.m. on the day of the Memorial Gala. Everything will converge then. I read that line 3 times. The Memorial Gala. The event Simone had insisted on planning. The gathering where she'd told her conspirators she would get me to sign control over to her. Loretta had known. In February, while I was still pretending she'd beat the cancer. While I was still bringing her tea and reading her detective novels in the hospital, she'd been documenting Simone's conspiracy and building defenses. I'm sorry I can't be there to fight beside you, the note continued. But I'm leaving you weapons. Use them. Protect what we built. Protect the people who depend on us. And know that I loved you every single day of 40 years. Which is why I'm making sure you survive this. The dead don't speak. Except when they've loved you enough to leave breadcrumbs through the dark. It was signed with her full name, Loretta Ann Thornton. The way she signed legal documents, making it official, making it real. Below her signature, one final line. Don't let them see you coming. I folded the note carefully, slipped it into my pocket along with the safety deposit key. The memorial gala was scheduled for next week. Simone had planned it as the moment of her triumph, the emotional setting where she'd manipulate me into signing everything over while I was surrounded by memories of my dead wife. Loretta had planned it as the moment I'd have every weapon she'd left me, converging in one place at one time. But first, I had to survive the performance of still being the broken widower who didn't know what was coming. They arrived at 2 in the afternoon with expensive takeout from a restaurant Loretta had loved, and I knew the performance had begun when Darren asked how I was sleeping. Not well, I said, which was true. We sat on the mansion's rear patio, June's sun warm on the flagstones, the lunch spread between us untouched. I let my hands tremble slightly when I reached for my water glass. Dad, you look exhausted, Darren said, playing dutiful son with the same conviction he'd brought to every role he'd ever failed at. When's the last time you slept through the night? I don't remember. Simone leaned forward, her face arranged in perfect sympathy. This is exactly why we're worried. You shouldn't have to carry all of this alone. Not while you're grieving. I'm managing, I said softly, letting my voice crack just slightly on the second word. But you don't have to, she pressed. We just want to help carry the weight. Let us handle the brand decisions for a few months. The vendor contracts, the expansion plans, the foundation oversight. You need time to heal. I looked down at my plate, letting silence stretch. Playing broken, playing weak, watching from the corner of my eye as Simone glanced at Darren with the smallest satisfied smile. Maybe you're right, I said finally. I can't seem to focus on anything since... I trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. Wounded. Of course you can't, Darren said quickly. Nobody expects you to. Mom just died. The words hung there, and I let them see me flinch. Simone's hand touched mine across the table, warm and predatory. We love you, Dad. We just want to help. 40 years of running a business teaches you how to negotiate. 40 years of marriage teaches you how to act. I nodded slowly, like a man too tired to fight. Let me think about it. They left an hour later, convinced I was breaking. I watched their car disappear down the driveway, then checked my watch. 3:15. I had 45 minutes to get downtown. The private bank smelled like polished marble and old money, all hushed voices and discretion. Sterling Chambers met me in a conference room on the 3rd floor. 57 years old and dressed in an impeccable navy suit, carrying the authority Loretta had given him 6 months ago, when she'd still been strong enough to plan. Mr. Thornton. He shook my hand firmly. Your wife was very specific about timing. She knew they'd move fast after her death. She left me a note, I said. I know. She left me several. He opened the safety deposit box with the brass key, laid documents across the conference table. Trust amendment protecting your voting shares from any transfer, even under duress or claimed incompetence. Financial power of attorney that can't be superseded without my co-signature. And this. He slid a thick folder toward me. Loretta's handwriting on the tab, Memorial Fund Structure. The fund is set up as an irrevocable charitable trust, Sterling said. Your wife moved those assets 6 months ago, legally untouchable for personal use. But here's what she built into the structure if anyone tries to borrow against it. Redirect the funds. Or claim emergency family access. The trust automatically notifies every board member and triggers a state investigation into potential charitable fraud. I stared at him. She built a trap. She built several. Sterling's smile was grim. The memorial fund is the most elegant. Anyone who touches it commits a crime the moment they try, and the evidence of their attempt becomes public record. My wife had died building me a legal fortress. All I had to do was let them walk into the moat. If they touched that fund before the gala, Sterling continued, The entire board gets notified, and state investigators automatically open a file. Loretta turned $8 million into bait. The question is whether Simone's greed will be bigger than her caution. By tomorrow, I would have my answer. Tomorrow came. The first thing I noticed when I tried to log in to the brand management system on day 5 was the error message telling me my credentials had been permanently revoked. The second thing I noticed was that I was not surprised. I sat in the brand office on the second floor of the flagship restaurant, surrounded by glass walls and chrome furniture Simone had installed last year, over Loretta's objections. My wife had said it looked like a tech startup, not a soul food empire built on grandmother's recipes. She'd been right. I tried the email system. Access denied. Please contact brand director for credentials. The accounting software. Access terminated. Contact system administrator. Internal security camera feeds. Access blocked. Submit request for restoration. Every system I'd built over 40 years now treated me like an intruder. Every password I'd created had been changed. Every access point sealed. They'd locked me out of my own empire while I'd been sleeping, while I'd been grieving, while I'd been pretending to be too broken to notice. How do you steal a man's empire? One password at a time. Brand director. That was Simone's title, the one I'd given her 3 years ago when she'd convinced me she understood the business, when I'd believed her performance of caring about Loretta's vision. System administrator was probably whoever she'd brought in to execute the digital coup. I pulled out my phone to call our IT contractor, the one I'd hired 5 years ago, the man who'd built these systems to my specifications. His number went straight to voicemail. When I tried the company line, a recorded message informed me the contract had been terminated. They were thorough. I'd give them that. Dad. I looked up. Simone stood in the doorway of her glass office, the one adjacent to the conference room I'd been using. She wore a charcoal designer suit that probably cost more than Gwendolyn made in a month, and her smile had the smooth confidence of someone who thought she'd already won. I didn't know you were coming in today, she said, walking toward me with measured steps. You should be resting. I wanted to review the quarterly reports, I said, keeping my voice soft. Tired, playing broken. But I seemed to be locked out. Oh. She arranged her face into sympathetic concern. Yes, I'm sorry about that. The systems needed modernizing anyway. You've been so distracted with grief. We thought it best to handle the transition smoothly. Transition. Security upgrade, she corrected quickly. For protection of assets during this difficult time. You understand. I nodded slowly, like a man too exhausted to argue. Who did you hire? A contractor Sterling recommended, actually. Very efficient. They completed the security migration the afternoon of Loretta's funeral. Got everything done in one day. The afternoon of the funeral. I let the words sit there between us, watching her face, for just a second. Her eyes widened fractionally as she realized what she'd just admitted. The afternoon Loretta was buried. The day we'd stood at the grave while they lowered my wife into the ground. She had been planning this while I was choosing Loretta's casket. The afternoon of the funeral, I repeated quietly, letting my voice shake just enough, not with rage, with hurt. Playing the devastated widower who'd just learned his family had been working while he mourned. Well, life goes on, Simone said, recovering quickly. The business can't stop just because we all have to keep moving forward. I turned away, letting my shoulders slump in what looked like defeated exhaustion. She couldn't see my face anymore. Couldn't see the cold fury I was barely containing. While I had been standing at the grave, she had been here changing passwords. While I had been accepting condolences from people who'd loved Loretta, Simone had been stealing my access to everything we'd built. That evening, Gwendolyn would show me exactly what else they had been doing while I grieved. That evening, we met in the parking garage beneath the flagship at 7:45, after the last kitchen staff had clocked out and the security cameras on the lower level had been conveniently offline for 3 days. Gwendolyn's sedan sat in the furthest corner, tucked between concrete pillars under dim fluorescent strips. She emerged, clutching a weathered leather folder against her chest like contraband, her face lined with the weight of what she'd been carrying. "I made copies before they could purge the vendor files," she said. "Ms. Loretta taught me to keep paper backups. Say computers don't delete themselves." "How long have you known?" 6 weeks. I was waiting for the right moment. Loretta said you'd come looking when you were ready. 6 weeks. Loretta had been dead 3 weeks. Gwendolyn had known about the theft while my wife was still alive. "She suspected," Gwendolyn said, handing me the folder. "She asked me to watch the numbers, document anything that didn't match what we received." I opened it in my car, dome light casting yellow shadows. Invoices for premium beef from Tennessee. $20,000 over 3 months for meat that never arrived. Consulting fees to Atlantic Solutions Group, a company that didn't exist anywhere except on these payment authorizations. Equipment maintenance contracts with a Delaware LLC registered to someone named Bradford. Simone's maiden name. Loyalty is the rarest currency. Gwendolyn was spending hers to save what Loretta built. How much total? Conservative estimate, $400,000 from supply chain alone, she said quietly. That's just what I could trace. $400,000. Stolen systematically over 8 months while Loretta was dying, while I was driving her to chemotherapy. I flipped through more pages. Premium ingredients that never appeared on prep sheets. Technology upgrades that never happened. Insurance premiums for policies that didn't exist. Every authorization was signed by Darren Thornton. I pulled out my wallet, found the birthday card my son had sent me last year. I held it next to one of the payment authorizations under the dome light. Same name, wrong hand. The D in Darren leaned left on the authorization, right on the card. The loop in the T crossed too high. The pressure was different. The spacing between letters just slightly off. How deep does betrayal go when you can't trust your own son's signature? "This isn't his handwriting," I said. Gwendolyn leaned closer. "You're sure?" "I'm sure. Either Darren learned to forge his own signature to create deniability, or Simone has been signing his name for months and he has no idea. My son was either a co-conspirator smart enough to plan his own defense, or a fool being framed by his wife. Either way, his name was on $400,000 in theft. I pulled the Atlantic Solutions invoice closer. Authorization dated 3 months ago, when Darren had been in Miami for a trade show. I remembered because he'd called me from the airport. Complained about the flight delay. He couldn't have signed this. He wasn't even in the state. "Tomorrow night," I said. "The wine cellar backup system stores security footage going back 6 months. Tomorrow night, the wine cellar cameras would tell me which version of my son I was dealing with." The wine cellar beneath the flagship was the one place Simone had not thought to digitally lock me out of, because she didn't know it. Existed as anything more than storage. At 11:30 on night 6, I used the hidden server room key Loretta had given me a decade ago. The stairs descended into cool darkness that smelled like oak and old wine. The false panel behind the barrel racks opened with a click, revealing the backup security server Loretta's IT contractor had installed in 2018. She'd never trusted cloud storage. Said if something mattered, it should live on hardware you could touch. The monitor glowed to life, casting blue light across dusty wine bottles. I navigated to the security camera archives, searching for footage from the past week. Deleted. Every camera feed from day 5 through 6 showed the same status files removed. Storage reclaimed. Simone had been thorough, but she didn't know about the backup. I ran the recovery protocol, watching the system churn through fragments. The hard drives had been wiped. But deletion doesn't truly erase it, just marks space as available for overwriting. If the data hadn't been replaced yet, pieces remained. The screen flickered, video data corrupted, audio fragment recovered. 4 minutes, 12 seconds. 4 minutes. Please let it be enough. Digital ghosts. That's what deleted files become, haunting the hard drives of the careless. I connected headphones, pressed play. Static hissed, then cleared into voices. The audio quality was poor, compressed, but recognizable. Simone's voice came first, sharp and businesslike. The fund is the leverage we need if the voting shares get complicated. Once we control the charitable designation, we can borrow against it before anyone notices. A second voice, muffled, with the passive cadence I'd heard my entire adult life. Darren, are you sure Sterling won't catch it? Sterling is focused on the trust amendment, Simone said. He won't look at the memorial fund until after the gala. By then, it's done. A third voice entered, male, authoritative, unfamiliar. I can have the collateral paperwork ready by gala morning. The charitable designation has a 90-day window before it becomes irrevocable. We're at day 73. Just keep the old man distracted until we lock it down. My breath stopped. That voice. I'd heard it before. But where? And if he doesn't stay distracted? Darren asked. He will, the third voice said with confidence. Grief makes people stupid. Trust me, I've seen this before. Lock the charitable designation before Chambers realizes the amendment loophole, and the fund becomes our asset, not the family's. How many people had my wife trusted who were planning her empire's theft? The audio crackled. Simone again. What about the Memorial Fund board? Already handled, the unfamiliar voice said. 3 of the 5 board members will vote our way. The amendment Loretta signed gives them authority to restructure in family emergencies. Her death qualifies, and Leland won't know until it's too late. Keep playing the concerned daughter-in-law. By the time the gala ends, we'll own the fund outright. The recording ended in static. I sat in the cold wine cellar darkness, replaying it 3 times. The third voice spoke with the confidence of someone who had been inside our family's financial structure for years. He referenced Sterling by name, knew about trust amendments, understood the memorial fund's legal designation and its 90-day vulnerability window. This was not some hired consultant. This was someone close, someone with access to documents only family advisors would have seen, someone Loretta had trusted. I saved the audio file to a thumb drive, tucked it in my pocket. The voice was familiar in that maddening way of recognition just out of reach. A tone I'd heard at dinners, at business meetings, someone in the fabric of our lives. By morning, Sterling would tell me exactly who had that kind of access. Sterling Chambers slid into the passenger seat of my car at 7:15 on a gray Thursday morning while rain drummed the roof. And before he could ask why the urgent meeting, I pressed play on the audio fragment. We drove aimlessly through Midtown, windshield wipers beating rhythm against the downpour. The recording played through the car speakers, crackling with static. Simone's voice came first, then Darren's muffled responses. Then the third voice. Sterling's hand shot up. Stop! Rewind that! The third voice. I backed it up, let it play again. I can have the collateral paperwork ready by gala morning. The charitable designation has a 90-day window before it becomes irrevocable. That's Garrett Prescott, Sterling said. Your family's financial advisor. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. The man who's been managing Loretta's memorial fund for 8 years. Sterling's face had gone pale. He coordinates the board meetings, handles all the investment strategies, processes every disbursement request. He has complete access to the fund's structure. Garrett Prescott, 46 years old, always perfectly dressed, always eager to explain investment returns in that smooth voice that made numbers sound like promises. The man who had stood at Loretta's funeral and told me with tears in his eyes that he would make sure her charitable legacy lived forever. Trust is a blind spot. The closer someone stands, the less you see. How long? I asked. Sterling was quiet for a moment, watching rain sheet down the windshield. Loretta questioned his recommendations multiple times over the past 2 years. She felt he pushed too hard on aggressive growth strategies, wanted to move the fund into instruments that seemed unnecessarily complex. Why didn't you tell me? She asked me not to. Said she didn't have proof, just instinct. He turned toward me. Last December, 6 months before she died, she told me explicitly to keep Garrett away from any documents related to voting shares or trust amendments. She didn't say why. I thought she was being overcautious. I stopped at a red light, rain hammering the hood. A memory surfaced. Dinner at the mansion. Maybe a year ago? Loretta setting down her wine glass with that particular look she got when something bothered her. Garrett smiles too much, she'd said. What? I'd asked. When he talks about money, investment returns, fund growth, portfolio performance, he smiles like it's personal, like he's counting it in his own account. She'd shaken her head. Maybe I'm paranoid from the medications. I'd kissed her forehead, told her not to worry about business, to focus on getting well. How many warnings had I dismissed as grief talking? She wasn't paranoid, I said now. She was right. Sterling nodded slowly. She saw it. Maybe not the full scope, but she knew something was wrong with him. That's why she built all those protections. Why she structured the fund with the automatic triggers. She was preparing for exactly this. The light turned green. I drove through the intersection, letting the pieces fall into place. Simone and Garrett working together for months, maybe years, using Darren as either accomplice or useful idiot, targeting the memorial fund Loretta had built to honor her grandmother's legacy. The charitable trust meant to feed Atlanta's families for generations. And tonight, we were all supposed to gather for a memorial dinner at the flagship restaurant's private dining room. Just family and close advisors, Simone had said. A chance to remember Loretta together, to discuss how to move forward. I suddenly knew exactly what Simone would try to turn it into. A restructuring discussion. A grief-stricken family making emotional decisions about protecting assets. Garrett there to provide financial guidance. Documents already prepared. Everything framed as honoring Loretta's memory, while actually stealing it. Tonight, I said. She's going to make her move. Tonight. What are you going to do? I pulled to the curb. Let the engine idle while rain pounded the windows. What was I going to do? I was going to let her make her move in front of witnesses. The table in the flagship's private dining room was set with Loretta's grandmother's china and the soul food recipes she had perfected over 40 years. But the woman who had called this memorial dinner was planning to use it as a stage for corporate theft. 8 of us gathered at 7. Me, Darren, Simone, Garrett, and 4 Memorial Fund board members. The room smelled like my wife's fried chicken and collard greens, dishes she'd taught our kitchen staff to make exactly right. Candles flickered on the table between framed photos of Loretta at various restaurants over the decades. Her smile bright and real in every image. Simone played hostess with perfect grace, serving the first course herself, telling stories about how much Loretta had loved bringing people together over food. She waited until everyone had eaten, until the obligatory memories had been shared and tears had been wiped. Then she pivoted. Loretta would want us to be practical, Simone said, setting down her fork with careful deliberation. Her legacy depends on the fund's stability during this transition. We owe it to her memory to ensure continuity. Across from me. Garrett nodded. Which is why tomorrow's budget presentation is crucial. We need unified board approval to protect the stakeholder value she built. They were using her memory as a weapon. Darren sat beside his wife, silent as always, pushing food around his plate. The 4 board members shifted uncomfortably, caught between grief and business, unsure which was appropriate at a memorial dinner that was transforming into a corporate meeting before their eyes. There are violations of law. Then there are violations of the dead. This was both. The expansion proposal Garrett and I have been developing, Simone continued, positions the brand for sustainable growth while honoring Loretta's vision. Tomorrow, we'll walk through the financial projections. One of the board members, Helena Whitfield, sat rigid in her chair. She was in her early 50s, had worked alongside Loretta on community initiatives for years, and right now she looked like a woman watching a desecration she couldn't stop. Garrett launched into talking points about market positioning and revenue streams, his smooth voice turning my wife's memorial into a pitch meeting. Simone smiled and nodded. Playing the devoted daughter-in-law, protecting the family's interests, I maintained my broken widower expression. let my hand shake slightly when I reached for my water glass. Watched them believe I was too grief-stricken to understand what was happening. Dessert arrived. Loretta's peach cobbler, the recipe her grandmother had brought from Alabama in 1952. Garrett excused himself to take a phone call, leaving his napkin folded beside his plate. Helena leaned toward me, reaching for the water pitcher. "Mr. Thornton, may I?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. I held out my glass. As she poured, something pressed into my palm beneath the table. A business card. Her fingers lingered just long enough to make sure I felt it, then withdrew. "Loretta told me to watch for this," she whispered. Bare audible beneath the conversation Simone was conducting about tomorrow's board meeting logistics. Predators hunt in packs, but so do the loyal. I palmed the card, slipped it into my jacket pocket while nodding at something Simone was saying about respecting Loretta's charitable intention. Helena sat back in her chair, her face carefully blank. But her eyes met mine for just a second. Not everyone at this table had been bought. The dinner dragged on another hour. Simone performing grief between strategic mentions of tomorrow's presentation. Garrett returning to add financial credibility to her narrative. I played my part. The exhausted widower, grateful for family support. Too broken to make decisions. When it finally ended and people began leaving, I waited until I was alone in my car to look at the business card. Helena Whitfield, Community Outreach Director. On the back, handwritten in small, urgent letters. "Don't trust tomorrow's budget numbers. Call me tonight." That night, Helena would tell me exactly what those numbers were hiding. At 11:30 that night, with Sterling sitting across from me in the library and Loretta's memorial fund documents spread between us like evidence at a crime scene, I finally understood what Garrett and Simone had been building toward. Helena had delivered the papers herself an hour after the dinner ended, appearing at the mansion gate with a briefcase and a face that told me sleep wasn't happening tonight for either of us. She'd been collecting evidence for months, she said. Loretta had asked her to. Now those documents covered the library desk in overlapping layers of theft. "They're using the $8 million as leverage for a loan you never authorized," Sterling said, pointing to a loan agreement dated for tomorrow's gala. $3 million for an expansion you know nothing about. Your signature at the gala makes it legal. I scanned the loan papers. Borrower, Thornton Family Enterprises. Collateral, Loretta Thornton Memorial Scholarship Fund. The fund my wife had established for culinary scholarships in her grandmother's name. Built to feed Atlanta's families for generations. The board minutes are forged. Sterling continued. They show unanimous approval for restructuring the fund as business collateral, dated 2 weeks ago. But 3 of the 5 board members were out of state that day. And if I sign anything tomorrow, thinking it's a memorial tribute, you legally validate the collateral seizure. Garrett gets his commission on both the loan origination and the fund management fees. Simone gets control of the $3 million for whatever expansion she's actually planning. How do you steal a legacy? Make the grieving sign papers they can't see through tears. I looked at Loretta's photo on the desk. She'd built that fund to honor her grandmother, the woman who taught her to make biscuits from scratch, who fed neighbors during the Depression with nothing but flour and determination. They were betting I'd be too grief-stricken tomorrow to read what I was signing. They were betting wrong. Past midnight. Footsteps stumbled on the stairs. Darren appeared in the hallway, shirt untucked, tie gone, reeking of bourbon. "Dad," he slurred, steadying himself against the doorframe. "Still up." "Go to bed, Darren. Waited so long." He laughed bitterly. "So long for my turn. Finally. But Simone keeps changing the plan." I stood slowly. "What plan?" "Just the shares. Just supposed to be the voting shares. Temporary during your grief." He squinted at me like he was trying to focus. "But she keeps meeting with Garrett. Private meetings. Why does she need Garrett when she has me?" My son had no idea he was just useful cover. "What are they doing with the fund?" Darren asked, and I heard genuine confusion in his voice. She said the fund was untouchable, that we were just stabilizing operations. But tonight, at dinner, Garrett kept talking about collateral and budget projections. What does that mean? He was my son, and she had turned him into a weapon against himself. Go to bed, I said quietly. Did I do something wrong? Darren's eyes were wet. Whether from alcohol or realization, I couldn't tell. Is she doing something I don't know about? Yes. She was stealing from both of us, using his name and his signature and his passive acceptance to build a conspiracy he was too weak or too drunk to understand. We'll talk tomorrow, I said, after the gala. He nodded, stumbled toward his room, leaving the smell of bourbon and failure in the hallway. I returned to the library, where Sterling sat, surrounded by evidence of systematic theft. Tomorrow was the gala, the memorial for Loretta. The convergence point where Simone and Garrett expected to lock down everything, with a few signatures disguised as tribute. Tomorrow. I would let them think they'd won, right up until the moment I destroyed them. But first, at dawn, there was one more box Loretta had left me to open. The bank manager who met us at the Buckhead branch before sunrise had been given instructions by Loretta 6 months ago to open early. On this specific date, the second safety deposit key she'd left weighed almost nothing in my hand, but felt like it carried the weight of her final words. Dawn was breaking over Atlanta as Sterling and I followed the manager through the silent building to a vault older and deeper than the First Bank's modern system. She unlocked the gate, pointed us to box 892, and left us alone. The key turned smooth. Inside the narrow metal drawer sat a tablet device sealed in a protective case, a stack of legal documents, and an envelope in Loretta's handwriting. I opened the envelope first. The note inside was dated February 14th, Valentine's Day. When she still had the strength to hold a pen steady. My love, if you're watching this, I'm gone, and they're moving. Don't let grief make you weak. Everything you need is here. I love you. Play the video. The way she dotted her eyes, small circles instead of dots, a habit from Catholic school she'd never lost. She knew exactly what day you would need this, Sterling said quietly. I lifted the tablet from its case, pressed the power button. The screen glowed to life, showing a single video file. For Leland, February 2026. My hand shook as I pressed play. Loretta appeared on screen, sitting propped against pillows in our bedroom, February light streaming through the window behind her. She looked thin but alert, her eyes clear, her voice steady. Seeing her alive on screen, hearing her voice. 40 years of marriage condensed into 8 minutes of goodbye. Leland, she began, and I had to bite down hard to keep from making a sound. If you're watching this, it means I lost the fight. I'm sorry I left you alone to deal with what's coming. She shifted on the pillows, gathering strength. Listen carefully. I'm naming you sole controller of all voting shares in Thornton Family Enterprises. The document Sterling has proves it, notarized and witnessed. Simone has no legal claim to operational authority. None. If she's telling you otherwise, she's lying. My throat closed. Garrett Prescott is financially compromised. Loretta continued. He took a bad loan last year, trying to cover personal gambling debts. I have proof Sterling can access. He's desperate, which makes him dangerous. Don't trust him with anything. She looked directly into the camera, straight at me across the months. Don't you dare let them take what we built. But Leland, her voice softened. Don't punish Juno for what her mother is. I've set up an educational trust for her and any other grandchildren. Completely separate and irrevocable. They're protected no matter what happens with the business. Don't let this destroy the innocent. The dead don't haunt. They guide. And Loretta had left a roadmap written in love and legal precision. Simone will use grief as a weapon, she said. She'll cry and talk about family and say she's protecting my legacy. She's protecting nothing but her bank account. You taught me how to build this empire from a food truck and a dream. Now, build the wall that keeps the thieves out." She smiled then. That small, private smile I'd seen 10,000 times across 40 years. "I love you. I loved every single day with you. And I'm sorry I can't be there to fight this battle beside you. But I left you the weapons. Use them." The video ended with her looking straight into the camera, that smile still on her face. She'd built me this final weapon: moral authority, legal protection for innocence, and her recorded voice telling the world exactly who was stealing from the dead. I sat in the bank's consultation room, holding the tablet, feeling Sterling's hand on my shoulder. "Thank you, baby," I whispered. "I'll finish it." But the most powerful evidence was still waiting in a 16-year-old girl's phone. I was alone in the mansion's attic storage room, sorting through boxes of gala supplies, when I heard footsteps on the creaky stairs, light, hesitant, the kind of steps that carried secrets. I turned to find Juno standing in the doorway, her 16-year-old face pale in the dusty afternoon light, streaming through the single octagonal window. She clutched her phone like it might explode. "Grandpa," she whispered, "I need to show you something. I should have shown you weeks ago, but I was scared." The fear in her voice made my chest tighten. This child had already lost her grandmother, and now she looked like she was carrying the weight of the world. She crossed the cluttered space and sat beside me on an old steamer trunk. Her hands shook as she unlocked her phone. The night after Grandma's funeral, I couldn't sleep. Everyone was still here at the mansion. I went downstairs for water around 2 in the morning. She paused, swallowing hard. I heard voices in Dad's old study. Angry voices. So I recorded it. I don't know why. I just felt like something was wrong. She turned the screen toward me, and my world tilted on its axis. The video was dark, shot from what must have been the hallway outside the study. The door cracked just enough to capture 2 figures illuminated by a desk lamp. Simone's voice cut through the grainy footage, sharp with anger. "You promised me that policy would list our child as beneficiary." Our child. Garrett. Not hers. Not her foundation. Ours. My son-in-law's response was quieter but equally cold. "The paperwork is already filed." Loretta signed the changes 2 weeks before she died. The pregnancy announcement just needs to come at the right time, after the estate settles. No one will question a grandmother providing for her grandchild. I felt Juno's small hand grip my arm as I watched my daughter's husband and her best friend discuss insurance fraud over Loretta's barely cold body. Simone's next words were venomous. "She never suspected a thing. Thought I was her friend. Thought you were her devoted husband. The trusting fool built an empire and died without protecting it." The video shook slightly. Juno must have been trembling even then, but captured Garrett's final statement with brutal clarity. "The life insurance pays out $2 million. The foundation accounts Loretta moved assets into last month total another $3 million in liquid funds. With her recorded wishes about family care and her documented concerns about Marcus's stability, we'll control everything before anyone realizes what happened." The recording ended abruptly, probably when Juno fled back to her room. I sat in silence, my granddaughter's terrified breathing the only sound in the dusty attic. This wasn't just an affair or opportunistic theft after Loretta's death. This was premeditated. They had manipulated my dying wife into changing beneficiaries, into moving money, into creating the perfect setup for them to steal everything she had built. And they had done it while she was dying, while she still trusted them both. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner," Juno whispered, tears streaming down her young face. "I was afraid of what it meant. Afraid of breaking up the family even more than it's already broken." I pulled my granddaughter into my arms, feeling her shake with sobs against my shoulder. She had been carrying this poisonous knowledge for 3 weeks. protecting me while destroying herself with the burden. "You did nothing wrong," I told her, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "You were brave. You gave me the truth." But as I held her, a new realization crystallized like ice in my veins. They hadn't just stolen money. They had stolen Loretta's final act of love, her foundation, her legacy, her plan to help the community she had fed and nurtured for 40 years. This wasn't about inheritance. This was about erasing everything my wife had stood for and replacing it with their greed. And that made it war. War meant strategy. War meant choosing the battlefield. Sterling's sedan idled in the Ritz-Carlton's shadow, while my lawyer spread evidence across the dashboard like a general mapping. Positions. We'd left the mansion an hour ago, after Juno had given me her phone video. Now Sterling laid out every piece in chronological sequence. Loretta's concerns from February, the insurance policy changes, the memorial fund manipulation, the shell company invoices, Garrett's deleted audio, my wife's video will, and finally Juno's recording of Simone and Garrett planning theft over Loretta's barely cold body. They filed papers yesterday to rebrand the Thornton Community Foundation as the Simone Garrett Family Trust, Sterling said, tapping a document. State approval pending, but the application is already in motion. They're erasing her name, not just her name. Her 40 years of feeding this city, her grandmother's recipes, her legacy of employing people who couldn't get hired anywhere else. He looked at me across the evidence. They want to be remembered as the ones who built something Loretta only started. The papers showed it clearly. A new mission statement that mentioned Loretta once in passing, called her a valued predecessor. The trust would honor her vision, they said, while modernizing operations for sustainable growth. Translation: take credit for everything she built while reducing her to a footnote. I closed my eyes and saw Loretta's hands kneading dough at 3 a.m, building an empire, one biscuit at a time. They're not stealing her empire, I said. They're stealing her. Exactly. In 5 years, the community will remember Simone and Garrett as the saviors who expanded the charitable work. Loretta becomes the woman who started it, not the one who built it. She'll be erased from her own legacy. The afternoon sun beat through the windshield. Outside, valets moved cars for early gala setup. In 4 hours, 200 of Atlanta's elite would gather in that ballroom to celebrate community service. Simon had planned it as her coronation. She'd invite people to toast Loretta's memory while signing documents that erased her name from everything that mattered. "What are you going to do?" Sterling asked quietly. I looked at the evidence spread between us. Quiet legal battles took years. Court filings disappeared into bureaucratic machinery. Depositions happened behind closed doors, where truth got buried in procedure. Meanwhile, Simone and Garrett would smile for cameras, cut ribbons at renovated soup kitchens, give interviews about continuing Loretta's work. The lie would become history before the truth ever reached trial. How do you fight people who don't just want your money, but want to erase the fact that you ever mattered? I want them destroyed, publicly, I said, the way they tried to destroy her. Sterling was quiet for a moment. Then, the gala stage gives you 200 witnesses and moral high ground. Atlanta's business elite, foundation board members, city council representatives. Everyone who matters will be watching. Can we play the videos there? The ballroom has full AV capability. I can have the technical setup ready. He gathered the papers. Loretta's video is her voice from beyond death, telling everyone her wishes. Juno's recording is them confessing conspiracy. Combined with the financial evidence, it's not just legal proof, it's a public execution. I thought about Simone's smile, Garrett's smooth confidence, the way they'd performed grief while planning theft. They'd used the memorial dinner to position themselves as family protectors. Tonight, they expected to use the gala the same way. They expected tributes and tears and signatures on documents I wouldn't read carefully enough. They expected me, broken, grateful for their support, too grief-stricken to see what I was signing away. Then that's where we end this, I said. Through the car window, I could see the Ritz-Carlton's grand entrance, where in 4 hours, Atlanta's elite would gather to celebrate community service and philanthropy. They would expect speeches about Loretta's legacy, champagne toasts to continued charitable work, and gentle tributes to a beloved restaurateur. Instead, I would give them 2 videos. 5 million in documented fraud, and the public destruction of 2 people who thought they could steal a dead woman's soul. But first, I needed to prepare my family for the war I was about to declare in their name. Backstage at the Ritz-Carlton smelled like orchids and desperation. Staff rushing past with floral arrangements, while I stood alone near the service entrance. Through the velvet curtains, I heard the ballroom filling with Atlanta's elite. 400 souls gathered to honor Loretta's memory, while her enemies prepared to erase her legacy. After 9 days of gathering evidence and documenting betrayals, I felt nothing but cold clarity. Mr. Thornton. The voice came from my left, cultured and careful. I turned to find Douglas Mayfield approaching, 61 years old, with silver hair and expensive tailoring that spoke of old money. I hope you don't mind the intrusion. I'm Douglas Mayfield, Foundation Board Trustee for the past 8 years. I know who you are, I said. You voted to keep the culinary scholarships. Something shifted in his expression. Your wife fought hard for those scholarships, which is why I need to tell you something. He glanced toward the VIP dressing rooms. I've served on this board long enough to recognize when something isn't right. The financial restructuring Simone's been pushing, her positioning to control the foundation, the sudden urgency to memorialize Loretta while dismantling her programs. It doesn't honor your wife's memory. It buries it. I studied his face, looking for the angle. Everyone wanted something. Why tell me this? Because I remember what this foundation was before the politics, he said quietly. And if you need someone to witness what happens tonight, someone with credibility the board can't dismiss, I'm offering. He handed me a business card. My personal number. Whatever you're planning, you don't have to face it alone. He walked away before I could respond, leaving me with an ally I hadn't known I had. What would you do if someone handed you a script for your own humiliation? Before I reveal what Simone's speech demanded I say, tell me in the comments. Comment surrender speech if you think I should read it word for word. Or comment burn it if you'd set it on fire. This is a fictionalized dramatization. 20 minutes later. Simone found me in the VIP dressing room, her burgundy gown shimmering, her smile sharp as broken glass. There you are. Dad, I was worried you might be having second thoughts. She held a leather portfolio. I had our communications team prepare your remarks. Given the emotional weight, we thought it best to give you something polished. She handed me 3 typed pages. I scanned the opening and felt my blood turn to ice. I stand before you tonight to announce my complete retirement from public life and my full confidence in Simone Thornton's vision for the future of the Loretta Thornton Legacy Foundation. You want me to surrender, I said. I want you to accept reality with dignity, she corrected, adjusting her earrings. You're 74, grieving, and overwhelmed by modern foundation management. This speech lets you step back gracefully while ensuring Loretta's work continues under competent leadership. Mine. I looked at the pages again, seeing phrases designed to gut me, acknowledge my limitations. Trust younger voices, grateful for Simone's guidance during this difficult transition. She'd written my obituary while I was still breathing. 30 minutes, Simone said, checking her watch. That's when you're scheduled to speak. She moved toward the door, confident and untouchable. Through the dressing room door, I heard the first guests arriving, champagne glasses clinking, laughter echoing off marble. Simone smoothed her gown, and gave me one last pitying smile before leaving to greet Atlanta's elite. She thought she'd won before the battle even started. In 90 minutes, I would teach her the difference between surrender and strategy. I folded Simone's surrender speech into my jacket pocket, feeling the paper crease against my chest like armor. 90 minutes until I took that stage. 60 minutes to make sure every piece was in position. I found Garrett adjusting his bow tie in the backstage corridor's full-length mirror, every inch the confident son-in-law about to eulogize his beloved mother-in-law. His tuxedo was impeccable, his expression practiced and solemn, his hands steady as he smoothed invisible wrinkles from his lapels. He looked like a man preparing to honor the dead, not rob them. Garrett. I kept my voice casual, friendly even. Impressive turnout. Simone said 400 RSVPs. He turned, his smile reflexive and warm. Dad, yes. Remarkable response. Your wife touched so many lives. The words rolled off his tongue like rehearsed lines, smooth and empty. The foundation team did beautiful work with the memorial program. I think Loretta would be proud. I'm sure she would. I moved closer, watching his reflection in the mirror. Speaking of the foundation, I've been going through some of the financial documentation, trying to understand the restructuring proposals. Something flickered behind his eyes. There and gone. Oh, well, that's really Simone's area. She's been handling the strategic planning. Right. I nodded thoughtfully. Though I did notice some interesting details. Those Cayman accounts, for instance. The shell companies opened the same week Loretta changed her insurance beneficiaries. 2 weeks before she died, wasn't it? The color drained from his face so fast, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. His hand froze on his bow tie, his practiced composure cracking like thin ice over deep water. For 9 days, he'd thought I was a grieving old man, too broken to notice my world being stolen. Now, he was realizing his mistake. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, but his voice had lost its smooth confidence. Of course, I smiled, letting him see the predator he'd failed to recognize. Probably just coincidence. Offshore banking, insurance changes, foundation restructuring, all happening in the same 2-week window. These things happen. Dad, I think you're confused. See you out there. Garrett. I patted his shoulder and walked past him toward the ballroom entrance, leaving him frozen at that mirror. This was the man who had held my daughter's hand at the altar, who had called me Dad for 12 years, who was now stealing from her mother's corpse. I'd welcomed him into our family, trusted him with our business connections, believed his grief was genuine. Every smile had been calculation. Every condolence had been theater. Behind me, I heard his footsteps, quick and uneven, moving away from the ballroom. I paused near the velvet curtains separating backstage from the grand hall, watching from the shadows as Garrett pushed through the service stairwell door. His phone was already at his ear before the door fully closed, but the acoustics in that stairwell were terrible for privacy and excellent for eavesdropping. He knows. Garrett's voice echoed up through the concrete space. He did with rising with panic. The accounts, the insurance, everything. I don't know how, but he's been investigating, not grieving. A pause while Simone responded, her voice too faint for me to hear through his phone. No, we can't wait. His words came faster now, desperate. We finish this tonight or we lose everything. He has evidence. Simone. Evidence. Another pause. Longer this time. Get him to read that speech before he has time to think. Force his hand. Once he's announced his retirement publicly, his credibility is gone, even if he tries to walk it back later. How long had he practiced that innocent expression in mirrors, perfecting the mask he wore while robbing the woman who welcomed him into our family? How many times had he rehearsed looking bereaved while calculating which assets he'd steal next? Garrett rushed back toward the ballroom, searching for Simone in the growing crowd. I checked my watch. 6 o'clock. The doors were opening, guests flooding into the grand ballroom. Atlanta's elite arriving to honor Loretta's legacy, with no idea they were about to witness a family's public destruction. 200 witnesses were taking their seats, and both sides were racing toward the same stage with opposite scripts. The Ritz-Carlton's crystal chandeliers cast golden light across 200 faces that had never missed one of Loretta's charity events. And tonight would be no exception. They arrived in evening gowns and tailored suits. Atlanta's culinary elite and business leaders and foundation donors, filling the grand ballroom with the low murmur of respectful conversation and the soft clink of champagne flutes. I stood near the stage, watching the room assemble itself like pieces on a chessboard. Sterling Chambers sat among the foundation board members at table 3. His position strategic and deliberate. Douglas Mayfield occupied the adjacent table, close enough to witness whatever happened next. My family was scattered throughout the crowd. Marcus at table 7 with Darren Mills, his husband of 4 years, a quiet graphic designer who had loved Loretta's fierce authenticity and now stood protectively beside his grieving partner. Juno sat 2 tables behind them, her eyes scanning the room with the same careful attention I'd taught her. The tables themselves told Loretta's story. Centerpieces of white orchids, her favorite, surrounded photographs spanning 40 years. Loretta, at 25, opening her first restaurant with borrowed money and borrowed recipes from her grandmother. Loretta, at 40, launching the culinary scholarship program that had trained 300 chefs. Loretta, at 60, standing in the foundation office that now bore her name, surrounded by the community she'd fed and elevated and loved. The irony cut deep. Loretta had planned this gala 6 months before her diagnosis, down to the orchid centerpieces and the menu featuring her greatest recipes. She had built her own memorial without knowing it, choreographed the event that would either honor her legacy or witness its destruction. Loretta would have loved seeing everyone together like this, a woman said near me, daubing at her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief. She had no idea how right she was. Marcus appeared at my elbow, his voice low and concerned. "You okay, Dad? You seem too calm." "I'm exactly where I need to be," I said, squeezing his shoulder. He studied my face, looking for cracks in the composure, finding none. "You're planning something." "I'm honoring your mother." Which was the truth, just not the complete truth. Across the ballroom, Simone and Garrett worked the crowd with practiced grief. She wore black Chanel with pearls Loretta had given her for her wedding, performing devotion with every calculated gesture. Garrett stood beside her in his perfect tuxedo, shaking hands and accepting condolences like a man who hadn't spent 9 days plotting theft and fraud. They moved through the tables with purpose, touching shoulders, whispering gratitude, playing their roles flawlessly. But I watched their eyes meeting across the crowd, saw the urgent whispers when they thought no one was looking, noticed how they kept glancing toward me and then toward the stage. They were afraid. Good. The scheduled program wasn't supposed to start for another 15 minutes. Time allocated for guests to settle, for servers to begin the first course, for the room to achieve the perfect blend of memorial solemnity and celebration of life that Loretta had specified in her planning. Notes. But Simone was done waiting. I watched her lean close to Garrett, her lips barely moving. "Now, before he can position himself." Garrett nodded, his jaw tight. And Simone straightened her shoulders and moved toward the event coordinator stationed near the stage. The coordinator looked confused they were ahead of schedule, but Simone's smile was insistent and her whispered words apparently convincing. How many of these guests knew they were witnesses rather than mourners? Players in a drama none of them had bought tickets for. They'd come expecting tears and remembrance, tributes and toasts, the warm glow of honoring a woman who had built something beautiful. They had no idea they were about to watch a family tear itself apart. "I'd like to say a few words before dinner service," Simone told the coordinator, her voice carrying just far enough for me to hear. While everyone's gathered and focused, The coordinator dimmed the ballroom lights, and a spotlight hit the podium as Simone climbed the 3 steps to the stage, micro in hand, her smile perfectly calibrated for cameras. 200 people quieted, expecting a loving tribute from Loretta's devoted friend and protege. They were about to get something else entirely. Simone's voice cracked perfectly on Loretta's name. A masterclass in manufactured grief that made half the ballroom reach for tissues. She stood in the spotlight's glow, one hand resting on the podium as if for support, her expression combining devastation and dignified strength in precisely calibrated proportions. 40 years ago, she began, her voice soft and trembling. Loretta Thornton opened a tiny restaurant in a neighborhood where banks wouldn't lend and critics wouldn't visit. She had her grandmother's recipes, borrowed money, and a belief that food could build family, even among strangers. Simone paused, letting emotion wash over her face. I met her 22 years later, a culinary school graduate with big dreams and empty pockets. She took one look at me and said, "You'll do. Let's feed people." The crowd leaned forward, caught in the narrative. I recognized the story Loretta had told it at a dozen fundraisers, the genuine version, before Simone started performing it. Loretta taught me that feeding people wasn't just business, Simone continued, her voice growing stronger. It was love made visible. Every plate that left her kitchens carried intention, care, the message that whoever ate it mattered. She gestured to the photographs on the tables below. Look at these faces. 300 scholarship recipients, 15,000 families fed through emergency programs, 40 years of turning recipes into relationships, restaurants into community. Women dabbed their eyes. Men nodded solemnly. Even people who had known Loretta for decades were moved, their genuine grief amplified by Simone's performance. That was the twist that made her dangerous. She was so skillfully convincing that truth and lies became indistinguishable, her manipulation invisible even to witnesses who should have known better. She dreamed her foundation would feed Atlanta's families for generations after she was gone, Simone said, and I felt my jaw tighten because those were Loretta's exact words, spoken 6 months before her death during the gala planning meeting. And I promised her, in those final weeks, that I would protect that dream. I watched her quote Loretta's actual words about feeding families, twisting my wife's genuine compassion into costume jewelry for a thief. She wore Loretta's vision like stolen pearls, performing devotion to the woman whose legacy she was systematically erasing. Simone's expression shifted them, concern replacing grief. "But I'm worried," she said softly, her eyes finding me in the audience, "because that dream requires leadership. And Leland—" Her voice caught beautifully. "Leland shouldn't have to shoulder this weight alone, not while his heart is still breaking. Managing a restaurant empire and a foundation and his own grief, it's too much for anyone." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Sympathetic faces turned toward me, seeing the broken widower Simone was painting. "So I'm asking the board to trust me," Simone continued, her voice firm with purpose now. "Trust me as Loretta's partner, as someone who understood her vision, to guide us through this transition, temporarily. Of course, until Leland is ready. Let me carry this burden, so he can grieve in peace. Let me honor Loretta by protecting the man she loved and the legacy she built." How many con artists practiced their tears in mirrors, perfecting the exact moment when voice breaks and eyes glisten for maximum impact? How many hours had Simone rehearsed this performance, timing each pause, calibrating each gesture, weaponizing compassion into corporate theft? Loretta believed in feeding people, Simone concluded, her voice ringing with conviction. Let me feed her vision. Let me care for her family. Let me prove worthy of the trust she placed in me. The ballroom erupted in applause, genuine, enthusiastic, believing every word. Board members nodded to each other, already mentally drafting the resolution that would hand Simone control. Guests wiped tears, moved by her selfless offer to protect poor, devastated Leland from the burden of his own empire. She had nearly done it, nearly stolen everything through public sympathy alone. Douglas Mayfield shot me a warning look from his table if I didn't act now. The board would vote her into power before dessert arrived. I stood up, and the room went silent. The walk from my table to the stage took 15 seconds, but Simone's confident smile died somewhere around step 7. I climbed the 3 steps with the same deliberate calm I'd carried for 9 days, and extended my hand for the microphone. She hesitated, confusion flickering across her face, then surrendered it with a practiced, gracious nod. She expected me to read her surrender script, to publicly hand her my empire, while 200 witnesses applauded my weakness. "Thank you, Simone," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's excellent acoustics. "I'll take it from here." I turned to face the crowd, seeing my family scattered among the tables, Marcus watching with tense shoulders, Juno leaning forward. Ready. Sterling Chambers positioned strategically near the board members, Douglas Mayfield alert and waiting. "I know some of you expected a different speech tonight," I began. Simone wrote me a beautiful one, very moving, all about stepping back gracefully, trusting younger voices, accepting my limitations. I paused, letting the words settle. It's folded in my jacket pocket if anyone wants to read it later. But my wife left instructions of her own, and I think it's time we honored what she actually wanted. The shift in the room was immediate. Sympathetic expressions turned uncertain. Simon's hand gripped the podium's edge, her knuckles white. "Loretta knew she was dying," I continued, my voice steady and clear. "Pancreatic cancer gives you time to think, time to plan, time to recognize which people around you are grieving and which are circling." I let that sink in. She also knew some people might try to take advantage of her death, so she took precautions. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Board members exchanged glances. Behind me, I heard Simone's sharp intake of breath as she understood I wasn't reading her script, wasn't surrendering, wasn't the broken, grieving fool she'd been counting on, even dying, even weak. Loretta had been 3 moves ahead of the people trying to steal from her corpse. While they'd plotted in coffee shops and planned their timeline, she'd sat in Sterling's office amending trusts and building legal walls they'd never see until they crashed into them. 3 weeks before my wife died, I said, she amended our family trust and the foundation bylaws. She added specific protections against manipulation, conflicts of interest, and unauthorized transfers of authority. I signaled to the AV technician stationed near the back wall. She left a note explaining why. The ballroom screens flickered to life, and Loretta's handwriting appeared, her distinctive cursive. The letters she'd written in her final lucid week filled 6-foot displays on either side of the stage. 200 people went silent, reading the words of a dead woman speaking from beyond her grave. To my foundation board and family, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I've made provisions to protect what we built together. Trust the documents Sterling Wakefield holds. Trust Leland's judgment, and be very careful who you trust with my legacy. Not everyone who performs grief is actually grieving. My wife's handwriting filled the screens like a ghost had walked into the ballroom. And 200 people stopped breathing. The impact was visceral. Loretta's actual hand, her actual words, warning them from death about the very manipulations Simone had just attempted. Sterling Chambers, my attorney, and Douglas Mayfield, foundation trustee, I called clearly. "Please join me." They rose from their tables and walked to the stage with professional composure. 2 men who had witnessed Loretta's final legal preparations and could validate every word I was saying. They flanked me, their presence transforming my speech from emotional accusation into documented legal testimony. "These gentlemen witnessed the legal protections my wife put in place before her death," I said. "They can verify the authenticity of the amendments the circumstances under which Loretta made them, and her state of mind when she signed. Sterling and Douglas stood solid beside me, their validation complete. Simone remained frozen at stage edge, her performance mask finally cracking, as she understood Loretta had built legal walls she couldn't climb. But the documents were just the opening act. The real evidence was still waiting on my phone. I handed my phone to the AV technician, and Sterling's voice filled the ballroom with the clinical precision of a surgeon making the first cut. Mrs. Thornton recorded this on May 28th, 16 days before her death. She was of sound mind and clear intent. The screens flickered, and Loretta appeared. My wife sat in Sterling's conference room, thinner than I remembered, but with eyes that burned with fierce clarity. She wore the blue cardigan I'd bought her for Christmas, her hands folded calmly on the mahogany table, and when she spoke, her voice was steady. If you're watching this, I'm gone, and someone is trying to take what isn't theirs. 200 people stopped breathing. A dead woman was speaking, testifying from beyond her grave against thieves who thought death had silenced her. I built this empire to feed people, not enrich thieves, Loretta continued, her recorded image filling both massive screens. I've made legal provisions to protect my family and foundation. Sterling holds the documents. Leland knows the truth. If someone tells you I wanted anything different, they're lying. She paused, her expression hardening. And if they're stealing, I want them prosecuted. The video ended. Silence pressed against the ballroom walls like water behind a dam. Simone stood frozen at stage edge, her performance mask shattered. Garrett had moved toward the exit, but stopped when guests blocked his path, their bodies unconsciously trapping him. Thank you, Mrs. Thornton, Sterling said quietly to the empty screens, then turned to face the crowd with professional composure. Now, let me show you what we found. Financial documents replaced Loretta's face. Bank statements, wire transfers, corporate filings for shell companies with names designed to sound legitimate and mean nothing. Sterling walked through them methodically, his laser pointer highlighting dates and amounts. $5 million moved through 3 shell companies between May 15th and June 2nd, he said, transferred from foundation accounts to offshore holdings in the Cayman Islands. The accounts were opened the same week Mrs. Thornton's insurance beneficiaries were changed. Seeing her face on that screen, hearing her voice pronounce judgment on thieves, the room understood they were witnessing a ghost's trial. Loretta had died knowing she'd be robbed, so she'd built her testimony into legal permanence, ensuring her murderers would face her even after they thought they'd escaped. Douglas Mayfield stood from his table, his voice carrying official weight. I can confirm, these transfers violated foundation bylaws and fiduciary duty. The board was never consulted or informed. Sterling displayed another document, this one showing insurance policy changes. Life insurance, $4 million. Beneficiary changed from family trust to a new entity listing. He paused, letting the words hang. Our child, as recipient. Murmurs turned to gasps. The crowd was connecting pieces faster than Sterling needed to explain them. There is no child, I said quietly into the microphone. Yet. But there is a recording. Juno's phone video appeared on the screens. Timestamp reading 2:07 a.m. on the night after Loretta's funeral. Audio quality was imperfect, but sufficient. Simone's voice emerged first, hushed and urgent in the restaurant office's darkness. She never suspected a thing. Thought I was her friend. Thought you were devoted. Garrett's reply, bitter and calculating. The pregnancy announcement comes after estate settles. No one will question it. Widow's grief. Daughter-in-law supporting him through loss. Natural progression. And the insurance policy. Already done. Our child inherits. We manage the trust. Leland fades into retirement. Betrayal has layers. Theft. Then lies. Then discovering the affair was happening while your mother died. Marcus had gone rigid in his seat, Darren's hand gripping his shoulder. Juno whispered something I couldn't hear, her face stricken. The video continued. Simone and Garrett planning timeline and logistics with the casual efficiency of people who believed they'd already won. They discussed the surrender speech, the foundation takeover, the gradual asset transfer that would leave my family with nothing. When the audio finally stopped, the ballroom sat in absolute silence. 200 witnesses stared at Simone and Garrett like exhibits in a crime museum. Simone's face had gone white, Garrett's hand trembling as he gripped a chair back for support. And I still wasn't finished. I opened my mouth to deliver final condemnation, but the silence shattered when Simone pointed at Garrett and screamed. This was his idea. I was just trying to help the family. Garrett's head snapped toward her, shock and fury transforming his polished features into something feral. You lying! He lunged forward, stopped only by Douglas Mayfield stepping between them. You opened those Cayman accounts. You forged the transfer authorizations. Because you told me Loretta wanted this? Simone's voice cracked, desperation replacing her earlier composure. You said she asked you to protect the foundation from Marcus, that she was worried about his judgment. 200 witnesses leaned forward, watching co-conspirators destroy each other with the same horrified fascination reserved for car accidents and natural disasters. Every accusation revealed another layer of planning, another detail that made the betrayal deeper. The affair was your idea, Garrett shouted, his voice echoing off the ballroom's vaulted ceiling. You seduced me to get access to the family. You said Loretta was old-fashioned, that she'd never understand modern foundation management. You're the one who changed the insurance beneficiaries. Simone's mascara ran in dark streaks down her face, her performance mask completely shattered. You told me it was standard estate planning, that everyone did it. I was protecting my son. What son? There is no son. There's just your lies and my stupidity for believing them. I stood silent at the microphone, watching them cannibalize each other's credibility. Sterling remained motionless beside me, professional composure intact, but I caught the faint curve at the corner of his mouth. This public implosion was better than any closing statement we could have scripted. Thieves only stay loyal until the ship sinks. Then it's claws and teeth fighting for the last lifeboat. Simon and Garrett had conspired for months, planned every detail, coordinated their timeline with surgical precision. But when the spotlight turned on them, partnership became liability, and loyalty evaporated like morning fog. You told me Leland would never investigate. Simone spat, her voice raw. You said he was too broken, too trusting, too old to fight back. And you believed it because you wanted to, Garrett countered. Because you saw dollar signs where I saw family responsibility. Family responsibility. You were stealing from your wife's mother. Marcus had his face in his hands, Darren's arm around his shoulders. Juno watched with tears streaming silently down her face. My family was witnessing not just financial crime, but the complete moral bankruptcy of people they'd trusted and loved. Watching your dead wife's enemies destroy each other in her ballroom felt like her ghost was conducting the symphony. Loretta would have appreciated the irony, the conspirators who'd planned her legacy's theft, now publicly eviscerating each other while 200 of Atlanta's elite bore witness. The ballroom's main doors opened, and two figures entered, with the unmistakable bearing of law enforcement. Detective Sarah Brennan led the way, a 15-year veteran of Atlanta's Financial Crimes Unit, known for methodical evidence gathering and airtight prosecution cases. Her partner followed, both showing badges to the security staff. Simone Bradford Garrett Thornton. Detective Brennan's voice cut through their argument like a knife through butter. I'm Detective Brennan, Financial Crimes Unit. We have a warrant for Foundation records, and we need to separate you both immediately. Simone's face went from red to white in seconds. Garrett actually stumbled backward, gripping a chair for support. Sterling had called them hours ago, coordinated their arrival to coincide perfectly with the evidence presentation. The transition from social exposure to criminal process was seamless, professional, devastating. Thank you for calling them, I said quietly to Sterling. Loretta would have insisted, he replied. Darren broke down crying at Marcus's side, his voice choked with grief and anger. Your mother just died and they were stealing from her. How could anyone do this? Marcus had no answer, just held his husband tighter. The investigators led Simone and Garrett down separate hallways, their shouted accusations fading into echoes. 200 guests remained frozen at their tables, champagne untouched, dessert forgotten, bearing witness to the complete destruction of two people who thought they could steal a dead woman's soul. The war was over, but the work of rebuilding Loretta's legacy had just begun. By 11 p.m., the Ritz-Carlton conference room looked like a crime scene, which I supposed it was boxes of Foundation records stacked on tables, investigators photographing every page. The systematic documentation of a family's betrayal. Detective Brennan worked with methodical precision, her latex gloves moving through financial documents while a federal agent cataloged evidence beside her. Special Agent Marcus Caldwell was a 12-year veteran of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, specializing in offshore asset recovery and complex embezzlement cases, and he approached the Foundation's records with the calm efficiency of someone who had seen every variation of theft. Federal warrant executed at 2247, Agent Caldwell announced, looking up from his laptop. Cayman accounts frozen pending repatriation. Total assets seized $5.2 million. Sterling stood beside me, tie loosened, exhaustion showing around his eyes, but satisfaction in his posture. Every dollar they stole will be recovered. Loretta's protections held. She planned for this, I said quietly. She planned for everything. Sterling gestured to the evidence boxes, the trust amendments, the Foundation bylaws, the video testimony. She built a legal fortress they couldn't breach even after she was gone. Detective Brennan sealed another evidence bag, her movements practiced and precise. We have documentary evidence of systematic embezzlement spanning 3 weeks, wire transfers, forged authorizations, shell company formations. The insurance fraud alone carries 5 to 10 years. I watched them work, transforming chaos into order, turning emotional devastation into numbered evidence bags and time-stamped photographs. This was justice, not the hot, cathartic confrontation I'd imagined during my darkest grieving hours, but cold, systematic documentation that would put thieves in prison. Revenge is hot and chaotic. Justice is cold and methodical, measured in evidence bags and frozen accounts. I'd wanted to scream at them, to make them feel the pain they'd inflicted. Instead, I'd documented their crimes with the same careful precision Loretta had taught me in 40 years of building businesses. One receipt at a time, one record at a time, one truth at a time. Mr. Thornton. Detective Brennan's voice pulled me from my thoughts. Ms. Bradford has requested to speak with you before transport. I turned to find Simone standing in the doorway, flanked by 2 officers, her makeup ruined and her expensive gown wrinkled. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by exposure. Please, Leland. Her voice was soft, broken, the same tone she'd used comforting Loretta through chemotherapy sessions. Think of the children. Juno shouldn't have to see her family destroyed like this. I studied her face, looking for genuine remorse, finding only calculation. Even now, even caught and exposed and arrested, she was performing. I made mistakes, she continued, tears streaming freely. But there's an innocent baby who needs... There is no baby, I said quietly. Your recording mentioned announcing the pregnancy after the estate settled. You haven't announced anything because you're not pregnant. You're just still trying to manipulate. Her tears stopped for half a second, surprise flickering across her face before the performance resumed. 3 weeks ago, her tears would have worked on me. Grief makes you vulnerable to anyone offering comfort, even liars. But I'd spent 9 days learning to see past performance to intention, past words to actions, past the mask to the thief beneath. Detective Brennan, I'm done here, I said, turning away. Simone's voice rose behind me, desperation replacing calculation. Leland, please. Loretta would have wanted. Don't, I said without turning around. Don't you dare tell me what my wife would have wanted. She left a video explaining exactly what she wanted. And it wasn't mercy for people stealing from her corpse. The officers led her away, her protests fading into the hallway. Sterling handed me a folder. Preliminary charges: embezzlement, wire fraud, insurance fraud, conspiracy. The DA's office will add more as they review evidence. I watched through the conference room window as 2 detectives escorted Simone and Garrett to separate patrol cars, their silhouettes disappearing into Atlanta's midnight streets. The woman who had held my wife's hand through chemotherapy, and the man who had called me dad for 12 years, were gone. Now I had to figure out how to rebuild what they'd tried to destroy. The rebuilding started with destruction. My son was waiting in the library when I got home, whiskey glass shaking in his hand like he already knew what was coming. Dad. Marcus stood when I entered, his face pale and exhausted. Behind him, the family portraits watched from the walls. 3 generations of Thorntons who had built things, protected things, understood that legacy meant more than inheritance. Sit, I said, pouring myself 2 fingers of the same bourbon. My hands were steadier than his. I need you to know I had no idea what they were doing. Marcus started, the words rushing out. Simone never told me about the accounts, the insurance changes, any of it, I swear. I know. I took a drink, feeling the burn. You're off the foundation board, out of business operations, effective tonight. The color drained from his face. What? You're also removed as executor of my estate and secondary trustee for your mother's foundation. Sterling has the paperwork. I didn't steal anything. His voice cracked. I wasn't part of what they did. No, I agreed. You just let it happen because you were too comfortable to notice. That's not fair. Fair. The word tasted bitter. Your mother built an empire with her hands while dying of cancer, and you couldn't be bothered to investigate when I asked for help. You thought I was paranoid. Remember? Told me to let Simone handle things. Marcus's whiskey glass hit the side table with a sharp crack. I asked you to let me help. You shut me out. I asked you to investigate Simone's accounts 2 weeks ago. My voice was cold, factual, final. June 1st, you were here, in this room. I showed you the transfer discrepancies, asked you to help me understand the offshore connections. You called me paranoid and left for Hilton Head the next morning. He opened his mouth, closed it. Memory was a cruel witness. Your mother built this empire feeding people, and you treated it like an ATM that dispensed money for doing nothing. I continued. 3 weeks. That's how long Simone stole from us while you played golf and ignored my calls. 3 weeks while I gathered evidence alone because my own son couldn't be bothered to protect his mother's legacy. I didn't know how to investigate like you do, Marcus said, his voice small and broken. I'm not a detective. You're 43 years old, and you've never had to fight for anything. The truth sat between us like a corpse we both recognized, but refused to name. Everything was handed to you. The education, the position, the trust fund, the respect you never earned. And when your mother needed you to step up, you stepped away. Tears ran down his face, silent and ashamed. What do you want me to do? Pack your things. You have 24 hours to vacate the guest house. Dad, please. Your inheritance is reduced to the minimum I'm legally required to leave you. The rest goes to the foundation and culinary scholarships in your mother's name. How do you tell your only son that competence isn't enough when he's never shown you even that? How do you explain that love doesn't excuse negligence? That being present means more than showing up. I tried, Marcus whispered. My whole life. I tried to be what you wanted. You tried to be comfortable, I corrected. There's a difference. He stood there, 43 years old and crying like the child he'd never stopped being. And I felt nothing but the cold exhaustion of a man who had won a war and lost his family in the process. Dad, his voice broke completely. Were you ever proud of me, ever? The question hit like a physical blow. 40 years of disappointment crystallized into 6 words. I looked at my son, my only child, Loretta's baby, the boy we'd raised with love and hope and expectations he'd never quite met. I stopped at the library door, his question hanging in the air between us like a verdict I couldn't bear to pronounce. I didn't turn around. Some silences answer louder than words ever could. I didn't sleep after leaving Marcus in the library. Some silences echo louder than rest. I found Juno at dawn, sitting beside Loretta's rose garden, 16 years old and looking like the weight of her father's crimes might crush her into the dirt. Dew soaked the hem of her dress from last night's gala. Mascara streaked down her face, her phone clutched in both hands like evidence she couldn't put down. Grandpa. Her voice was small and broken. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I sat beside her on the stone bench. Morning light filtering through the magnolia trees Loretta had planted 20 years ago. The roses were starting to bloom, despite everything pink and white and yellow, indifferent to human betrayal. You did the right thing, I said. I destroyed my family. Your father destroyed your family. You just refused to help him hide it. She wiped her eyes with shaking hands. Am I going to lose everything because of what Dad did? The question I'd been expecting. Your education is protected. Trust fund covers tuition and expenses through graduate school, if you want it. Basic living stipend until you're 25. Relief and confusion crossed her face. But Uncle Marcus, you threw him out. He didn't steal anything either. Your uncle had a choice, I said carefully. I asked him to help me investigate 2 weeks ago. He called me paranoid and left for vacation. He chose comfort over truth. And I chose to give you that video. Even though you knew what it would do to your father. I looked at her. This child who'd recorded her father's conspiracy and handed it to me knowing it would destroy him. That took courage your uncle never showed. So, yes, your education stays protected. The rest, you'll have to earn. Earn how? However you want. College, career, building something worth protecting. But no automatic inheritance. No empire handed to you for existing. You understand. She nodded slowly, processing. Because you don't want me to become like them. Because I want you to become like her. I gestured to the roses. Loretta's garden that she'd tended even while dying. Your grandmother built an empire with her hands, from recipes and flour and refusal to quit. She didn't inherit her success. She earned it. Loretta would have loved this girl's spine, terrified, but truthful. Exactly the kind of strength my wife spent 40 years modeling. Juno had stood in that ballroom, knowing her video would ruin her father. And she'd done it anyway, because lying was worse than losing. What if I can't? Juno whispered. What if I'm like him anyway? Deep down, bad blood, bad choices. Legacy isn't who you're born to, I interrupted. It's who you choose not to become. She looked at me, 16 and scared and trying to understand. Your father chose theft over honesty. Your uncle chose comfort over courage. You chose truth even when it cost you everything. I touched her shoulder gently. That choice matters more than blood ever could. But what if I make the wrong choices later? What if I... Then you'll have made them yourself, not inherited them. That's the difference. I watched the sun climb higher, burning off the morning mist. Inheritance is what falls into your lap. Legacy is what you build with your hands, even when your name would open easier doors. Your grandmother understood that. I think you do too. Juno was quiet for a long moment, watching the roses catch the light. Then she wiped her eyes and asked, Can I help rebuild the foundation Grandma started? Maybe you learn the restaurants from the ground up instead of managing from Anne. Office. I know I'm only 16, but I could start with whatever you need. Washington dishes, prepping food, learning how it actually works. I saw Loretta in that question, the willingness to start with flour on your hands instead of power in your title, to build rather than inherit, to earn respect through work rather than demand it through name. Yes, I said. You can start next week. Kitchen opens at 5 a.m. She almost smiled. I'll be there at 4:30. Maybe some part of what we'd lost could still be saved. 6 months changed everything. 6 months after the gala, I stood in the flagship restaurant, watching Gwendolyn Harper cut the ribbon on a business she now partially owned. And for the first time since Loretta died, the building felt alive again. The dining room was packed with employees and community members, not society donors or foundation board politicians. Gwendolyn, 63 years old, with flour permanently under her fingernails and 30 years of line cook experience, stood at the podium, wearing her cleanest apron and holding scissors that would officially reopen the restaurant under its new structure. Loretta always said this place belonged to the people who made the food, not just the name on the door, Gwendolyn said, her voice steady and proud. Today, we're making that real. 42 workers holding equity shares and voting rights, not employees serving an owner. Partners building something together. Applause filled the room, genuine and warm. I watched from the back, seeing the transformation I'd spent 6 months orchestrating. The empire Loretta and I had built was gone, dismantled deliberately, and replaced with something closer to her original vision: community ownership, worker equity, profits funding scholarships and emergency food programs instead of enriching children who hadn't earned them. Juno stood near the kitchen entrance in her prep cook uniform, 6 months of 4:30 a.m. shifts showing in the confident way she held herself. She caught my eye and smiled, mouthing words I could read across the crowded room. Grandma would have loved seeing this. She was right. Loretta would have loved every detail: the employee ownership structure, the profit-sharing model, the foundation restructured to feed people instead of sustaining family dynasties. This was what my wife had spent 40 years building toward, even if neither of us had understood it until she was gone. I'd lost my wife, alienated my son, and spent 6 months rebuilding an empire I no longer controlled, but the people Loretta fed for 40 years finally owned a piece of what they'd built. That had to count for something. After the ceremony, after the speeches and the tears and the shared meal prepared by newly minted worker owners, I found Sterling waiting in the restaurant office. There's one more thing, he said, holding an envelope. Loretta left specific instructions this be given to you only after the business restructuring was completed and the conspirators were prosecuted. I took the envelope, recognizing her handwriting immediately. Across the front, in the cursive she'd perfected in Catholic school 60 years ago. For the day you save what we built. She knew, I said quietly. Even then, she knew. She knew you'd save it, Sterling corrected. The question is, what she wanted you to do next. I turned the envelope over, feeling its weight. 6 months ago, I'd listened to her video testimony, watched her face on those ballroom screens, heard her voice pronounce judgment on thieves. Before that, her handwritten note had appeared warning the foundation board about manipulation and trust. She'd left me breadcrumbs through the darkest forest, and the last one was sitting in my hand, waiting to be read. Each message had come exactly when I needed it. The video when I needed legal protection, the handwritten warning when I needed public validation. And now this envelope, sealed 6 months before her death, waiting for the moment when the empire was secure and the thieves were gone. When did she give you this? I asked. May 30th, 2 weeks before she died. Sterling's voice was soft with old grief. She was very specific. Only after both conditions were met, business secured. Conspirators prosecuted. She said you'd understand when the time came. I looked at the envelope again, seeing the slight tremor in her handwriting that spoke of weakness and pain. but the message itself was clear and purposeful. My wife had planned even this moment, choreographed it from beyond the grave. The question was whether I was ready to hear it. I was ready. I opened the envelope in the flagship kitchen at sunset, standing in the exact spot where Loretta had taught me to make her grandmother's biscuits 43 years ago. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind she used for important documents. Her handwriting covered 3 pages. Leland, if you're reading this, you saved what we built from people who wanted to steal it. I knew you would. That's why I married you. You always chose love over money, even when it cost you. My throat tightened. 6 months dead, and she still knew exactly what to say. I'm directing the majority of my life insurance and recovered assets to endow culinary scholarships for Black youth in Atlanta. Give them the education I never had. Let them start with knowledge instead of just dreams. Proper business training instead of learning everything the hard way like I did. Asterisk. The remainder funds emergency food programs and employee profit sharing. The empire we built should feed people, not enrich people who mistake inheritance for accomplishment. There it was, her final instruction, crystal clear. Not to family bloodline, but to community empowerment. Not to children and grandchildren, but to strangers who would work for what they received. She'd spent 40 years building wealth, and in death, she was giving it to everyone except the people who thought they deserved it. I know what this will cost you. I know Darren will hate you for it. I know you'll lose family relationships protecting my vision. I'm sorry to leave you with those choices, but I'm not sorry for asking you to make them. Thank you for being the man who would choose what's right over what's easy. Thank you for protecting what we built from people who only valued what they could take. I love you. I always will. Loretta. I folded the letter carefully, hands shaking. 43 years ago, she'd stood at this counter, teaching me to fold butter into dough, laughing when I got flour in my hair, building something neither of us could name yet. We'd started with recipes and borrowed money and the belief that feeding people mattered. Somewhere along the way, we'd built an empire. And now, I'd given that empire away. Exactly as she'd known I would. The cost had been brutal. Simone and Garrett awaited trial, facing years in prison. Marcus lived across town, silent and estranged, his phone calls unreturned. The mansion felt too large with just me rattling around inside it. The empire I'd protected no longer bore my name or enriched my bloodline. But Gwendolyn owned equity in the business she'd given 30 years to. Juno was learning restaurants from the ground up instead of inheriting them from the top down. 300 scholarship recipients would get the culinary education Loretta never had. Emergency food programs would feed families the way my wife had always intended. What's the point of winning if you have to become the enemy to do it? What's the point of protecting family if family means enabling theft and calling it inheritance? I'd lost my son to save Loretta's vision. I hoped that was the right trade. Some nights, I wasn't sure. But standing here, in the kitchen where we'd started, where love and biscuits were born, I understood what she'd been teaching me all along. Protecting family sometimes means refusing to call greed by that name. Sometimes it means choosing legacy over bloodline, vision over comfort, what's right over what's easy. Through the kitchen window, I could see Juno arriving for her evening prep shift, tying on an apron just like Loretta used to wear. The empire wasn't mine anymore, wasn't Marcus's, wasn't even Juno's. It belonged to everyone who'd ever needed dough at these counters. And watching the next generation arrive to work instead of inherit, I finally understood what Loretta had been building all along. Some legacies you protect by giving them away. And to you, listening to my story, remember this. Sometimes protecting what matters most means disappointing the people who think they matter most. I lost my son when I chose Loretta's legacy over his comfort. I lost my wife before I could tell her I understood what she was teaching me. Don't wait until it's too late to see who people really are. Trust is earned, not inherited. And grief doesn't give anyone the right to steal your clarity. This might sound like a revenge story, but it's not. It's about transformation. Real revenge would have been destroying them for satisfaction. What I did was protect something bigger than my anger. I gave that empire to the people who'd actually built it, not those who wanted it handed to them. I believe God gave me the strength to choose justice over bitterness, legacy over bloodline. Sometimes the family you're protecting isn't the one you're born into. It's the one you build with integrity. This revenge story taught me that some legacies you protect by giving them away. So I'm asking you, what would you have done? Would you have chosen family loyalty or protecting your life's work? Drop a comment and let me know. If this story resonated, or if you know someone facing family manipulation, please share it. And subscribe for more true stories about the hardest choices we face. Thank you for staying until the very end. I appreciate you being here with me. One final note. This story includes fictionalized elements for storytelling, but the message about protecting legacy is very real.